Hello friends, welcome to the Create Your Shape podcast. I'm Jenny, or Jenny the Nutritionist, and I help ladies who lift weights, build muscle, and decrease body fat. So I have heard a lot of ladies say they don't want to look bulky. And while most people will just jump down your throat and say, you won't look bulky if you lift weights, I totally understand where they're coming from, but I also understand where you're coming from if you have had this concern before, because I have too, but it is so much more than just how much muscle you have. So I don't want to look bulky. I hear this a lot, and I actually get what you mean. There are generally 3 visions ladies have when they think of bulky, which I'll break down. And there are 5 factors that contribute to these looks, like genetics or bone structure, for example, where the muscle is located, ratios of sizes between body parts, how much fat is in certain areas, and last but not least, how much muscle is overall in these areas. So in this episode, I'm breaking this down, explaining it, and giving you instructions for each of these factors to not look bulky if that is one of your goals and one of your concerns. So let's get into it. First, I have to share being bulky is subjective. So we just have to get that out there. I think everyone knows that, but for some people, bulky looks a completely different way than other people. I think this really comes down to what your environment is like. I know as I've been exposed to more weightlifters and CrossFitters, people who are in the lifting world, my perspective has completely changed. So that's something to consider too, that your version of bulky doesn't mean everyone else's, and really to consider your environment, and that might shift over time. Now, I have to reiterate, because some of you guys are still thinking that I mean bulky is bad and you need to be a Pilates girl. That is absolutely not what I'm talking about. My intention is to show you that there's a range for everyone's view. And personally, I am not a fan of the Pilates girl look. I want to be more muscular than that, but I also want to have feminine curves. That's kind of my vision of an ideal shape, which to some people would look bulky and to other people would look too feminine, right? So there's always an illusion to kind of think through, but I would say most of my ladies, they want to look athletic and they want to look muscular to some degree. But I understand where they are coming from, where they're still hesitant because they're like, okay, I know that I'm not just going to get super bulky from touching a weight because you guys are all lifting, but there's still some underlying concern of like, oh, but I want to fine tune and still look sexy and feminine, and that's what this means to me. So I wanted to present a different viewpoint on this because I have been thinking about this a lot from content I see out there, when I've been talking with my ladies, and when I think about it for myself. Generally, I find that there are 3 versions, there's tons more, but there's 3 versions of bulky that people tend to think about, or when ladies don't want to be bulky, they're thinking about these body types. So the first is someone with male-like muscle. So that may be like an elite CrossFitter. So I've seen that before. And keep in mind, I have ladies who want to look like an elite CrossFitter. So again, there's no right or wrong answer here, but I'm just going off of what I've commonly heard or seen. And some people don't want to look like a elite CrossFitter. And so something where there's a lot of muscle, and especially typically more male-dominated muscle, that's what they think of, and they don't want that look. Something else that I hear, the second one would be just a non-feminine look. So maybe they're really strong, but they also have a lot of body fat, so they get bigger and necessarily don't look long and lean. So in their head, they don't want to be bulky, and to them, bulky means kind of looking stout, where you look kind of short and just wider, and you don't look feminine. And for them, feminine means long and lean. The third one that I see in the category that people are visioning when they say they don't want to look bulky is they don't want to look super, super athletic, where they're super lean and shredded. So a good example of this would be, I've seen this with older females where they're very, very lean, and so they don't have any breast tissue or glute tissue, and maybe they've been a runner for a really long time, but they are very, very skinny, and so it's just all kind of like skin and bones and some muscle, and so they do look shredded. That's another version of the bulkiness that people describe to me that they don't want to look like. So again, many people do want to look like all of these. It's all subjective. We're talking about bulky here. So let's just assume that this is subjective, and the ones who are listening to this podcast don't want to be these things for going forward. I put my disclaimer out there. Okay, so let's get into what creates some of these visions or the vision of bulky, and then how not to get to that if that is something that you're looking for. So the first is genetics. Bone structure is a perfect example of this. Again, going back to if you have more of a masculine leaning bone structure, then that does set you up to have more of a masculine look versus a feminine look. So a masculine look may look more just a straight shape. So if your bone structure at the top, middle, and hips is all kind of one line, then that will look less feminine than masculine typically. Or if you have a V shape where maybe your upper body is wider than your lower body, that may also create that. Versus a more feminine type shape that we typically see is more an out in out. So that would be out at the top of the body, in at the waist, and then out at the hips. So how could you work against this is work on growing muscles to create that out in out look. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. The next, when it comes to under genetics, is where does muscle typically gain fast? So I have seen and spoke with ladies recently, they're like, my upper body responds so quickly, but my lower body doesn't. So then when I work out in general, my upper body is developing faster than my lower body, creating that more non-feminine outline. So what you can do in this case is audit what your shape, how your shape is responding, and then adjust your training program and tailor it to the shape that you do want to build based on your genetical response, if that's a word. The next would be under genetics is where body fat is stored. So for example, for me, and this is the case for a lot of ladies, we naturally store body fat in the back of our arms and our back. So if I want to create a more feminine look, I need to have a lower body fat percentage to decrease the body fat in those areas to create a longer, leaner look. Another example of this is potentially ladies with bigger breasts. Sometimes they tell me that they feel like they bulk up really easy, especially when they're gaining body fat because everything up top just looks bigger. And then the opposite to that, if you get super lean and shredded from a really low body fat percentage, but it removes some of those feminine curves like breast and booty areas, then this can create a really athletic look. And for some people, it's too athletic and to them is viewed as a bulky look. So that's everything under genetics. The next category is where muscle is located. So going back, more masculine muscle is typically going to show up in your quads, your traps, potentially even like your biceps. If you think of men who do lots of biceps, right? And that could create potentially a bulky look to some. So whereas a more feminine look would be in your shoulders, in your glutes, and muscle in those areas. So for example, bikini competitors, their whole goal is to create the most feminine figure. And many of them, I was just talking to a friend the other day, she said, yeah, I only train and progress in my shoulders and glutes. I only do other body parts once every 8 days just to maintain muscle, but I'm only focused on growing shoulders and glutes. It's literally a sport, and that's literally their goal and what they do. But again, that is the difference between creating the masculine look and a feminine look. And then you can just adjust your program and get on a program that tailors to that. Of course, it would need to fit into your entire strategy to actually work and make sure you're building muscle, but I digress. You can find all of that in different episodes. Right now, we're just focused on what might create bulky. And so where muscle is located is number 2. Number 3 is the ratio between body parts. So for example, think of between your glutes and your waist. That ratio, again, across your entire body, when they all add up, will contribute to either a more bulky or masculine looking shape versus a more feminine shape. So I'm going to list out a handful of examples, but pretty much what you can do is you can see where you're at now and do an audit of your figure and look at your check-in photos and see what do the ratios look like. And then if an area is appearing larger, and this is the issue I'm having here, then we can decrease that area or just focus on the other area to offset it. For example, the out and out look. So upper body versus lower body. For me, I tend to notice this just a little bit. It's nothing extreme, but I definitely notice it where my upper body is slightly bigger than my lower body. Not an absolute, right? But if you looked at my outline. So this could create me personally, again, this is all subjective, personally to feel more masculine and more potentially bulky. However, what I can do is focus on growing my lower half bigger to offset this imbalance and to get back in balance. So I can be on a program that either slows down or just maintains my upper body and really focuses on building my lower body as much as I can. The next would be your waist to glutes. So we just went over that. Another one may be glutes to thighs. So some ladies may develop, whether it's because of genetics or because of the training that they've previously done before, where their quads grow and develop more than their glutes. So the ratio is not as feminine. And so therefore, to flip that, they would focus on glute growth and not quad growth as much. The other one, which is a big one, is the ratio between your shoulders to your arms. This one I think isn't as well known and gets overlooked, but in order to create that long, lean look, which this is on a spectrum, right? That some people want to look like just like a Pilates girl with long, lean look, but some people want to look like athletic but still feminine, and then some people want to look super muscular and a splash of still feminine. However, creating a longer, leaner looking arm, again, it's just an illusion between these ratios, between the shoulder and the arm. So if someone has really large like biceps and triceps, but then a smaller shoulder cap, then that may look more bulky compared to building up the shoulder cap. And this doesn't mean that you just ignore the arms and glutes. It's just fine-tuning your program so that way the ratios are adjusted to be balanced to create that longer arm. Because if you think about the shoulder cap going up and around, it's going to make the rest of the arm look longer and leaner, which doesn't mean it can't also look defined. These are ratios we're talking about. All right, that's number 3, ratios between body parts. The next, number 4, which is the number 1 contributor to looking bulky, is where and how much body fat you have. Now, this is the number 1 thing. So if you're confused on the rest of it or feel overwhelmed by the rest of it, decreasing body fat is generally going to solve this problem for you. Because what happens is, I would say maybe in rare cases, there are more body fat that's stored in a more male-like pattern, like in the belly or in the areas that contribute to more masculine shape, like we've talked about in genetics and ratios and what we've just covered. However, the main issue here is when ladies think I'm building muscle, they just take their body and they think just everything getting bigger, which can happen if you're just focused on building muscle, but you're not controlling any of the nutrition or considering any of the other factors. So if your body is just getting bigger, then you're getting wider, right? And you're not getting longer and leaner. So this might be the look where you may see a lot of power lifters like this, where they're focused on getting as heavy as they can and as strong as they can. And so the mass is getting bigger and wider. And to some people, they don't want that look because they think it looks bulky. So this really just comes down to decreasing body fat. And it almost is like, okay, you're gaining muscle, which is a great thing. But if you have the layer of body fat on it or increasing body fat as well, you're not seeing all of the lines and the curves in the definition. You're just seeing that mass, and that mass is just getting bigger. And a lot of ladies are like, oh, I don't want to get bulky. I don't want to get bigger. I want to be long and lean. All right, that's number 4, how much body fat you have and then where it's located. And this is the number 1 contributor. Now, going into number 5, this is the least contributor. And this is where coaches usually get defensive and say, like, it's incredibly difficult. You won't ever get there. And that's how much muscle is being bulk. So generally, you may hear, I don't want to be bulky, or you may hear, like, I don't want to put on too much muscle, right? And really what you guys are thinking about is all the other things I just listed that may contribute to a more masculine look or too much of a masculine look on your radar, would that be the term? So how much muscle you build, yes, is a part of it. However, usually coaches will get defensive and say, like, it's incredibly difficult to build muscle. The people who are professionals at it put blood, sweat, and tears every day to get to a point where they have this much muscle. So to think you can just accidentally achieve that is ludicrous. Now, which I agree with, it's like saying you don't want to drive a car because you don't want to be a race car driver. It is very difficult to gain that much muscle, and it also happens at a very slow rate. So if you get to a point where you're like, I think I'm starting to gain some muscle, maybe I don't want any more, which again would take a very long time to get to, then you can always just let your foot off of the gas and not gain any more muscle. However, it's really not about how much muscle there is, but where the muscle is, the ratios compared to different body parts, how much body fat is in reviewing your overall shape that contributes to all of these. Now, there is one more bonus one that I wanted to add on here that I think is kind of an outlier that still needs to be discussed, and that is posture. Now, if you have rolled in shoulders where you kind of hunch over, it can create an illusion where you look a little bulkier because your muscles are not pronounced as much on your back and your body fat is more, in my opinion. And so that hunched over look can create a more bulkier look. However, if you have good posture, so for example, if I lift my shoulders up and back and keep my chest up, I look completely different and I look longer and leaner and less bulky, but still fine-tuned than if I hunch over. So posture is a big one. Another way to look at this is the waddle walk versus a elevated walk. And so a waddle walk might be if you're just kind of like walking like side to side, instead of if you're lifting your core, if you're lifting your chest up and you're elongating your steps. I do this a lot in dance, so you can really see the difference in just how somebody walks and how their shape is presented. Now, that could be a whole other episode too, but that's a little bit of an outlier where the majority of what I would focus on is what everything else we just talked about, and this is kind of icing on the cake. So if you enjoyed this episode, please let me know, and then I'll see you next week on the Create Your Shape podcast. Now, if you have rolled in shoulders where you kind of hunch over, it can create an illusion where you look a little bulkier because your muscles are not pronounced as much on your back and your body fat is more, in my opinion. And so that hunched over look can create a more bulkier look. However, if you have good posture,